Okay, welcome to Devlog 2. I'm still not sure how to structure these. So if you have any suggestions about any format or structure I could use for these videos, just because I'm not entirely sure how to go about it, I think I'm just gonna explain kind of what I've done, obviously, since the last video. And yeah, then obviously after that, I'll talk about what I plan to do next. And I think that's all right for now, but hopefully I can think of a better way to structure it, maybe with a script of some kind. I mean, I kind of have a script, but it's just like dot points. YouTube video writing out of the way. Now let's talk about what I've done. So, okay, where we left off, I had kind of not much. I had movement, shooting, and enemies that would move towards you. I now have technically a game loop working, in that there's just infinite waves that go on forever, and enemies can actually hurt you now, and they will just spawn forever until you eventually die, which happens kind of fast. Well, not super fast, but in the future, hopefully the player will be able to survive longer when I add upgrades that you can get each wave. I think, well, maybe not each wave, but maybe every few waves you get an upgrade. But for now, you just have a gun and that's it. And so it gets kind of difficult when there's more enemies, but that's a problem for future me. So the first thing I did was I needed, obviously, an actual place to spawn the enemies from. And someone commented on the last video, I think Diamond Crazer it was, said that I could try spawning the enemies outside the bounds of the camera. I'm pretty sure that's what he meant. And I thought that was a pretty good idea. So that's essentially what I did. I used two values. I used a max spawn position and then a minimum spawn position. And I just used those to kind of create a rectangle just outside of the bounds of the camera. And I think that works pretty well for spawning enemies. The way I determine where along the rectangle to spawn the enemy is I just do a random number, either 0 or 1. If it's 1, I'll spawn it, say, on either the left or right side of the rectangle. And if it's 0, I'll spawn the enemy on the bottom or top. And then within those if statements, I'll determine which side they're going to be on, and then also determine how high up, if they're on one of the sides, or how far across from side to side they are if they're on the top or bottom, if that makes sense. Maybe I could try showing some sort of visual to explain that. But yeah, that's how the spawn position works. And I also actually, another suggestion from Diamond Crazer was to have enemies spawn exponentially. And this is also, in my opinion, I think that's definitely pretty good. And I think I was kind of thinking of that. But yeah, then that cemented it. And so I was like, yeah, I'm going to make them spawn exponentially. So I made a function on Desmos. If you know Desmos, it's an online graphing calculator. First of all, I made a function to determine how many enemies would spawn each wave. So I'll put the function up on screen. Essentially, the x-axis, so that's the side, the bottom axis going across, is the wave number. So at wave 0, there won't be a wave 0, but for example, at wave 0, it'll be at the center of the graph, and then wave 1, it'll be 1 over to the right, and so on. And so, as you can see, I've made an exponential function where from wave 1, the amount of enemies that will spawn in the wave just keeps increasing at a kind of huge amount. Well, not a huge amount, but it starts off small, and then obviously, if you're familiar with exponential functions, you'll know that it increases at an increasing rate. So it starts off increasing maybe 2 or 3 enemies each wave, and then once you get to wave 10, you're starting to get maybe 7 more enemies each wave, and it's just starting to get into crazy numbers. And this is pretty good. However, it's going to be kind of boring if the enemies are all spawning at the same rate every single wave. So I think what I also had to do was make a function that would determine the spawn interval of the enemies. Because the way the code works is it spawns one enemy at a time, which might end up being not a good idea. So I might end up changing the enemy spawning a bit. But yeah, for now, I just have a function. I'll put it up on screen now as well. And I'll put some gameplay on screen now, and maybe in like 5 times speed, showing how that looks in an actual game. After I'd set up the enemy spawning, enemy waves, so it goes on forever, I obviously need the enemies to actually damage the player, so the player can die. That was relatively easy to implement. It's not really a hard thing to do because the enemies have the player's position at all times. So I just kind of set it so, if the enemies are within this distance of the player, damage the player. And I also made it so obviously the enemies have attack cooldown of like 1 second, I think, where they just can't attack after they damage the player for a second. And then I playtested that a bit more and also realized that when you have a lot of enemies, they kind of damage the player way too quickly still. And so I added also a cooldown on when the player can be damaged, so that enemies have an attack cooldown and the player has a damage cooldown. So the player can't just take an insane amount of damage all at once, which I think was a pretty okay fix for it. I also added nice animations just for like a tiny bit of polish, just to keep my brain interested. And I gave the player a health bar as well, which is also pretty simple. Just add a slider and then set its value through the script. And then I also obviously made it, if the player dies, the game ends. The timescale is set to 0, so everything pauses. And then you get a simple death screen I made in like 2 minutes. That's the game loop finished. So it's technically a game now. It's not a good game, but for now it classifies as a game. So I think next I'm gonna start working on player upgrades, so that maybe every wave or every few waves you can upgrade your character, and then as a result you can obviously survive longer, get more upgrades, and keep improving to last longer. After I got the game loop working, I also did some minor tweaks. I made the gun recoil go back to its original position a little bit faster. I think it was just a tiny bit annoying with how much the recoil was like. You'd shoot once and then you kind of couldn't shoot again for a bit, like waiting for the recoil to go back to normal. And that was kind of annoying, so I made it so that you kind of don't have to wait as long for the recoil to go back down. And I think it works a bit better and it's just a bit nicer to play. As well, there was like, it seemed like the enemy's movement was like a little bit jittery. It didn't look very smooth or nice, and I kind of realized what I was doing wrong is I noticed every time I was moving the enemies, I was doing so through the update method. Since I'm dealing with Unity's physics, what I should have been doing is doing it through the fixed update method. So I changed that. Then after that, it was looking much nicer and smoother. So those are the changes I made. It's only been like 2 days, so that's what I got done. And yeah, I think next I'll start working on player upgrades. So maybe each wave or every few waves, you get options for different upgrades, and you get to select one, and then that benefits your player in a certain way and maybe also has some sort of drawback. And so you have to kind of pick wisely what you want to improve. And that'll add a really interesting aspect to the game and also make it a lot more replayable, because right now it's just shoot enemies with the same gun in the same place over and over again forever. And I think with at least upgrades, it'll be a lot more interesting and a lot more fun to play with. And then as well, once I have a lot of upgrades, I might see maybe some like interesting interactions between the upgrades, which I think will be very cool. And it'll also be interesting when I get playtesting going. So yeah, I think that's probably going to be maybe one of my favorite parts, is adding upgrades. Because I always enjoy like games where you can kind of work your way towards just being really powerful, and like the enemies that kind of were giving you grief early in the game become kind of nothing to you once you start leveling up and getting more abilities. So I think that'll definitely be very fun, and I'll try to have a new video out once I get some of that working to kind of showcase what it's going to look like, and also some of the things that I've added. I think soon I might think about uploading a demo, probably just to itch.io, and then eventually maybe even once I have the game in a more finished state, I'll upload a demo to Steam if I can figure that out. And then obviously you guys can go play that and tell me what you think. Tell me if you think anything feels off or request any features to be added, because I definitely am looking for lots of feedback on this, especially being hopefully my first Steam release. I want to make sure that everything's kind of to a good standard. So yeah, I think that's all from me, and I will see you guys in the next video, which hopefully should be soon. See ya.